Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan, and this is a review of the Masters of the Universe Classics, Dragon Blaster Skeletor. Another iconic Skeletor variant straight from the vintage line comes to Classics. Since we got Thunder Punch He-Man earlier this year, it was only a matter of time before we saw Dragon Blaster Skeletor, since he was released alongside Thunder Punch in the vintage toy line. Skeletor comes in the standard Masters of the Universe Classics blister card packaging. The back of that box shows off a selection of other Classics figures, as well as gives us a brand new bio for Dragon Blaster Skeletor. Alright, so first things first, Dragon Blaster Skeletor is supposed to come with a third mini-comic. But as you can see, my review sample is missing it. Looks as though Mattel is wanting to avoid any spoilers until the figure's release. So, let's go ahead and take a look at this figure outside of the packaging. Dragon Blaster Skeletor is, for the most part, a basic Skeletor action figure with some new additions. But there are some pretty cool little changes here. First thing to note is the paint job on the figure. He's very cleanly painted, however, I do have some paint chipping on his hands, revealing black plastic underneath, which is quite unfortunate. Now, the color of the paint job is very vibrant and bright. The blue of his skin is much brighter blue than the standard Skeletor release. Also, his face is a very bright yellow, with a little bit of green highlighting it around the edges and around his mouth. Now, before we get to his new armor, I want to point out a few other little differences. This time around, Skeletor utilizes the monster forearms that we saw used on figures like Whiplash, instead of the finned arms that the regular Skeletor had. In addition, he's also wearing those boots with the extra detailing that we first saw used with Cobra Khan, and he has painted feet, meaning he's wearing full boots. So why is this significant? Well, if you take the armor and Havoc staff from the standard Skeletor release and put them on this Dragon Blaster Skeletor's body, then for the very first time in the Classics line, we have a completely faithful adaptation of the vintage Skeletor action figure. The vintage figure had those same monster forearms and detailed boots, so aside from the black loincloth piece, he is now a perfect update of the vintage figure, and I must say, he looks incredibly awesome. So, let's go ahead and get back to that Dragon Blaster armor. The armor is colored purple with some red trimming just like that of the vintage action figure. There is a real metal chain, which is a really nice touch. The chain goes through a slot on his chest, one end of it has a green clasp that hooks onto Skeletor's left wrist, while the other end goes up to the collar of the dragon that is sitting on his back, complete with green padlock just like the vintage action figure. Now, the design of the dragon is interesting. The original figure had a gimmick where the dragon spit a mist of water very similar to Cobra Khan, and thus had a gap in his teeth in the front. This new version is the opposite, because he has a mouthful of teeth. Seriously, there must be like a million teeth there. The paint job on the dragon is also pretty nice, which is a mixture of reds with some nice purple that kind of fade together, and overall is pretty decent looking. Alright, taking a closer look at Dragon Blaster Skeletor. Before we get to looking at the dragon and the armor and everything, let's check out the articulation on this guy. If you've got any of the other Skeletor figures, it's pretty standard. So the head moves left and right, slightly up and down. We do have nice tight joints in the shoulders there, allowing for a good range of movement. One thing to note, you got this chain hooked onto his arm that is going to limit his articulation slightly, because you can see if we stretch his arm out all the way, that does pull tight on the chain. It's not too bad. I mean, you can still get him posed around just fine, but there are going to be limits with it. You can always pull the chain through too if you need to make it a little longer, dangle a little bit there. So Good solid joints though all the way around. You got the nice swivels at the bicep, you got the elbow bend, you got the wrist swivel. You can still move slightly up and down at the torso, but since he's got the armor that comes all the way down his waist, it is going to hinder that just a little bit. But you can swivel his waist there. He does have a nice softer loincloth piece. So good articulation at the thighs. You can get him sitting down. You can get him riding Panther just fine. Good knee joints there. Since he's got the new Cobra Khan boots, it does hide the pin at the articulation cut at the ankle, and he does have some nice solid ankle joints right there. So no loose ankles on this guy. He's not going to topple down. Now the Dragon has one articulation point at the head. You can see it's just on a ball joint, so you can kind of swivel that around. You can move it up and down. That's pretty much all you're going to get out of that though. The rest of the Dragon is a completely static figure. Now you can pull him off the back. He is nice and tight on there. You can see it does take a little bit of effort to pull him off. But the way this works is there's just this little knob coming off of the back of Skeletor's armor. And then you can see there's a little hole underneath the Dragon that just plugs right on there. So the legs and the feet, the hands, they're kind of molded to fit against Skeletor's back with that armor. So it looks like he's clinging on. But he actually attaches via that small little peg right there. Now, what stinks about this is that the Dragon is pretty useless when he's off of the back of Skeletor. I mean, he kind of dangles by this chain. There's no way to take this chain off of him without actually undoing the clasp. But it doesn't unhook or anything like that, so he's always on this chain. And you can't take it off of the Skeletor because it's clasped to this green little wrist bracer on the other end. So the best you could really do is just pull it all the way through so that you can have the Dragon sitting down on the ground next to him. But again, he's a completely static figure, and he's posed like he's holding onto the back of Skeletor's back. So you can't really stand the Dragon next to him and make it look good. There's no posing the Dragon around, anything like that. He's just always going to be tied to the figure. And I don't know. I'm not real sure how I feel about that, because I think it would have been really cool if we had an articulated Dragon that we can actually, stand at Skeletor's side like it was a little pet or something if we didn't want it on his back. So he's permanently attached to the figure unless you want to undo the chain link, and there's just really not a whole lot you can do with him there. Now the head is just on a ball joint, so that's kind of fun. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could pop off Skeletor's head, and we can put the Dragon head on the Skeletor body. And that's kind of neat, because that just gives us a way to pose the figure around and do some goofy things like this right here. So now we've got the Dragon walking around with a little baby Skeletor clung to his back. I don't know, that's kind of fun. It might be good for some customizing too, I guess, if you want to use the Dragon head on some figures to make like your own Dragon type character, but I don't know. There you go, guys. As far as weapons go, Skeletor only comes with his standard purple power sword, which has the same two-tone purple paint deco we've seen on all the previous releases, so nothing new here. Alright guys, it's comparison time. Here's a look at Dragon Blaster Skeletor standing alongside his vintage counterpart. Here you can get a look at the similarities in the design of the armor, and also just how different the dragons look from one another. Adding another iconic Skeletor variant to the collection is pretty cool. Those vintage variants are the most recognized and loved, and it's great to have this figure to square off against your Thunder Punch He-Man. I will say that I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the Dragon though. While the sculpt is good for the most part, he is a little goofy looking with that massive mouth full of teeth. I was also disappointed to find out that he was a completely static figure except for his head, and that taking him off of Skeletor's back is pretty much pointless since he can't stand on his own or even be unhooked from the chain. In my opinion, it would have been a lot cooler to have a little articulated Dragon that could double as a small pet for Skeletor. The paint scratching off the hands is another letdown, and I hope this is not a continued issue, as I know it's been coming up a lot lately. But I will say the thing that most excites me about this figure is the fact that you can make an accurate vintage Skeletor. That is awesome, and he very well may now take the prime spot in my collection as my main Skeletor. Dragon Blaster Skeletor is part of the 2012 Eternian Collectors Club subscription, and will be available on MattyCollector.com on September 17th, 2012. Until next time.